Welcome to Talking Out Your Glass. I'm Sean Wagoner. Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend is an artist for whom ideas have always been more important than media and possibly more integral to her work. It's interesting then that her art has been consistently viewed through the lens of glass. In the creation of her early X series to more recent calendar notations, she has pioneered techniques such as non-traditional unfired painting on glass, mixing glass with other media, and presenting painted decorated glass on the wall in reflected light. Throughout her career, the artist distilled her own life experiences in the creation of progressive and experimental work. While studying fine arts at the University of Texas, Austin in 1973, Stinsmuehlen-Amend was serendipitously introduced to glass and went on to become partner with Rodney Smith and designer of Renaissance Glass, an architectural glass studio. Beyond teaching and employing 14 artists, she built a creative hub that included studio space, glass supplies, a hot glass studio, education, and exhibitions. Understanding the cutting edge in the field, Stinsmuehlen-Amend invited luminaries in the studio glass movement such as Dale Chihuly, Paul Marioni, William Morris, and Narcissus Qualiata, among others, to lecture and teach in the early 1980s. The studio became the Center for Contemporary Glass in Texas from 1973 to 1987. While balancing single motherhood, donating time to the arts, and running her business, she became the Glass Art Society's first woman president and served from 1984 to 1986. Concurrent with designing stained glass commissions, Stinsmuehlen-Amend was determined to make the craft form a means for personal expression. Through experimentation and rebellion and influenced by the local punk scene, her radical fashion designer best friend, pattern and decoration, and Neo-Expressionism in art, as well as innovations in the world of craft, her work became unrestrained, kinetic, glittery, and jarring, defiantly not tasteful or functional. Combining mixed media with glass was a new idea at the time. For Stinsmuehlen-Amend, the shifting qualities of glass itself, its capacity to reveal, obscure, reflect, and distort, became integral to how meaning unfolds. Rooted in stained glass's narrative tradition, her story emerged through her everyday stream of consciousness, rooted in the surreal logic of dreams. In 1987, Stinsmuehlen-Amend relocated to Los Angeles, where she became a full-time artist. Solo exhibitions and dynamic public art commissions followed. She was the lead artist on the Hollywood Demonstration Project in Hollywood, completing a precast concrete crosswalk with inlaid glass and bronze and an adjunct wrought iron public space. In 1994, she completed leaded glass for the AT&T corporate headquarters and the Jewish Museum, both in New York City. Throughout these decades, she maintained her commitment to teaching, returning to Pilchuck Glass School repeatedly from 1980 to 2019 and serving as a visiting artist at RISD, RIT, Tyler School of Art, California College of the Arts, and numerous other institutions. Stinsmuehlen-Amend's work is included in major collections, including the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Detroit Institute of the Arts, Oakland Museum of California, Corning Museum of Glass, Tacoma Museum of Glass, and Museum of Art and Design. She has received 2 National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships, 2 Pilchuck-Hauberg Fellowships, and the 2007 Brichtova-Lubensky Award. The artist served 14 years on Pilchuck's Board of Directors and is a trustee emeritus of the American Craft Council and an honorary life member of the Glass Art Society. She was recently awarded by the American Craft Council with the Biennial College of Fellows Honor for contributions to the craft ecosystem. Opening on May 16, 2026 at the Corning Museum of Glass, Tough Stuff, Women in the American Glass Studio will feature Stinsmuehlen-Amend's work. This new exhibition celebrates the female artists who revolutionized American studio glass. The artist states, "Many artists found my loose and inclusive approach to working with glass inspirational because I was continually violating preconceived notions about craft and glass specifically." Many thanks to the sponsors of this episode of Talking Out Your Glass: Monarch Glass Studio, the Corning Museum of Glass, Resist, the American Glass Guild, Toyo Supercutters, Yakagani Glass, the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass, Wet Dog Glass, Milestone Decal Art, the Association of Clay and Glass Artists of California, Ed Hoy's International, and the Stained Glass Association of America. For more information on our sponsors, visit talkingoutyourglass.com. Click on Episodes, Season 11, and Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend. Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend, thank you so much for joining me on Talking Out Your Glass podcast.
Well, it's about time.
I've been after you for a while to come on the show, and I appreciate it so much. Thank you for coming on.
I wanted to wait until I had more material.
I think you have plenty.
I
But
know,
I'm
too
really,
much.
really excited to talk to you today. I'm just wondering, though you've worked through multitudes of media, your art is oftentimes considered through the lens of glass. Why do you think that is?
Well, I would say that most of what I call my artwork is includes glass in some form or another. And the first time I cut glass in 73, I thought it was such a miracle. It was a material that I'd never touched before. And I hate to use the term magic, but the wonder of it, the wonder of all of the ways that it can be. And I feel that glass can express various ideas or enhance ideas by how it's presented, whether it's a chunk of glass or it's carved or it's etched or it's painted. All of those things reflect on method and intention, and then also just the way it, in whatever form, the way it deals with light, or the way light connects with glass. Since I started in stained glass, I always thought of it more like two-dimensional. It's a two-dimensional material, but I never have thought that glass was two-dimensional. I always think it's three-dimensional, even if it's only an eighth of an inch thick, because it reflects, it transmits, it constantly is changing depending on the environment and the light again, and it's kinetic. I just think it's an exciting and wonderful material to work with that I don't think I'll ever stop being interested in finding out about.
So when and why did you open Renaissance Glass in Austin, Texas? Describe and discuss your business and studio, and who were some of your early visiting artists?
I've been looking back at that time period because I'm also in this show at the Corning Museum that Tammy Landis has curated, called Tough Stuff, and it's about women in the studio glass, during the studio glass movement, the 60s and 70s, that may have not gotten the attention that they deserve and deserve now. So I had to dive back into this time period, and I feel like I'm researching somebody that is like superhero or super heroine. I can't believe all the things I did at that time. This is so mundane, but I was studying painting and drawing, continuing at the University of Texas at Austin, and I was trying to finish up my BFA degree. And a neighbor who my son and his daughter were the same age. Anyway, we were friends. He came and he said, well, I'm taking over a stained glass studio that was really not much of anything. He's quitting his job as an engineer for the city of Austin, and I need somebody part-time to do design work. And I was like, okay, that's better than waitressing while I'm going to school. So I went over there, and like I said, as soon as I cut the glass, I went, how does this happen? And I just fell into it all the way, and then I was full-time. And then we were figuring out, like, people weren't sharing information back then. How do you etch glass? And we were doing all kinds of experiments and tests to try to figure things out. And he had traditionally done repair work, but we were able to get people to do commissions, and that kind of blossomed and grew. And I became the designer and also a fabricator, and he was as well. And he could figure out anything. He was the best partner, such a nice person, nice man. Anything that we needed, equipment-wise or shipping-wise or business-wise, he was able to Rodney Smith is his name, and Modest. He was amazing, especially now that I think back on it. I had so much help. The business grew with commissions, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of commissions, and mostly geared toward what the client and the client's at, home and all businesses, what they look like, and I just fell into it, and I did a good job at it, and that grew. And then we started hiring people. We hired mostly artists, and then we grew, and we had a store where we had all of these supplies for glass makers, so people could buy the materials. And basically we were building a community of glass makers, glass artists in Austin, and spread to Texas. So the first few slides are sort of kind of a beautiful flower images, a lily and a morning glory. I was, at that time, I think they were influenced by Kathy Bennell and Narcissus Quagliata. I was getting the glass magazines, and this art basis of mine, I was just like, what else is going on in glass around the country? And there was, is it Glass Art Magazine? I think it was Glass Art Magazine.
Mm-hmm.
It was just
Yeah.
a little, and it had people who were breaking the rules and doing new stuff all over. And it was inspiring for me. And I'm not sure the clear linear line of this, but anyway, I started going to PortCon conference or two and meeting people, and then I met Narcissus, and I invited him to come to our studio and teach and lecture, and he came. I mean, then Paul Marioni and Dale Chihuly and Bill Morris and Charlie Perriott. I mean, it was just amazing. So all of these, innovators and kind of mostly heroes. I didn't really bring women in, but so in that process, I had to learn how to promote. I had to learn how to set it up. I housed most of them in my tiny little house where there was no living room. It was my home studio, and I had one son at the time, my first son. And so the information and the sharing of ideas just grew exponentially. And the people in our studio were allowed to work on their own work on nights and weekends, so they had access to a sandblaster and grinding and polishing and all that stuff. So that was exciting that we were sharing the making, and actually that's when I made my artwork also. It's like I wasn't making it typically during store, shop, studio hours. And so I was doing that second job at the same time I was trying to make a living for everybody that was working there, to get enough job commissions and stuff. But so there's a couple of slides of commissioned work, and one is maybe a typical entryway door panel using a rondelle. That was a style I was using at the time that I felt was kind of postmodern. And then there's a 5-paneled large window for an education wing at a Catholic church, a memorial window but that would just be you can just see in the first slides some typical endeavors that do not show the radical change to the artwork. Again, these were simultaneous. So I don't know, I don't want to jump ahead, but through these interactions with these other artists, they became friends, and at that time, there weren't that many, well-known glass artists in the scene, and so it was pretty easy. It was much easier to get known then than it is now, I believe. But they started inviting me, like Paul invited me to be a teaching assistant at Pilchuck, and Narcissus wrote an article about me, and Dale was promoting me to teach at Chuck. It just all ballooned, and I spoke at the Glass Art Society conference. I'm going to step back for a minute. From the commissions, and in line with the commissions, I always wanted to do panels that were not connected to architecture, independent panels, and what I'm going to mention now, what did we call it back then? The autonomous panel. Is that stupid? The autonomous panel, like it had nothing to do with anything else. But I started doing, in 1983, I submitted a proposal to the Tucson Museum of Art, who was doing a sculptural show that Suzanne France, who was the curator, or she's the director, was planning in conjunction with the Glass Art Society conference in 1983. Anyway, I did my first screen for that show, and it featured 7 or 8 giant rondelles that Bill Morris and Dale Chihuly had made for me. And again, friendships, this sharing of everything was crazy. And so I made the screen, and my studio built the screens, which is amazing because they were big. They were like 8 feet tall. And in these panels, I used all different kinds of glass. I had this whole thinking about high and low, transparent, how transparent, translucent, opaque, so that there were these levels of perception in these screens. And anyway, the Rondelites was the first screen I did in conjunction with that museum, and it sold right away. And I was like, I loved making it. I loved the way it looked, and then it sold. And I was like, okay, we got to do more of these. And so there's another example of Splash Dash Dots and Dells, which was done, I don't know, 1985 or 4. And it also shows a picture of me. All the leads on almost all of what I call my artwork, the lead, and if I use copper or brass, which I did often, I would paint on them or rub them with some kind of oil paint or something, so that in reflected light, the lead or the constructing material held its own aesthetically. It was part of the whole drawing or the whole painting. It wasn't just like a dark black line that surrounded glass shapes. And that holds through pretty much with the next series that I'll talk about. But so it shows me rubbing what was called rub and buff on the leads. You can also see that there's like we used 3-inch lead, 2-inch lead. We'd drill through it. We were doing a lot with the construction, the support materials, again, to make them be part of the whole aesthetic or idea of the pieces. I was part of that studio. So I started working with him, and then eventually it became apparent that a couple years in, I got a small inheritance from my grandmother, and I bought into the business and became a partner with Rodney Smith. And then the responsibility was, and the commitment was truly there. And so continued till end of 1987, basically.
We'll return to Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Monarch Glass Studio, creating everything glass from corporate and commercial installations to fine rondelles and sheet glass for stained glass artists. Monarch Glass Studio is ready to talk with you about what unique glass can be made for your next project. For more information, visit monarchglassstudio.com. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by the Corning Museum of Glass. Be among the first to experience a powerful new exhibition celebrating the female artists who revolutionized American studio glass. Tough Stuff, Women in the American Glass Studio opens May 16th, showcasing the groundbreaking creators who shaped the past and future of glass art. Plan your visit and explore the stories, artistry, and journeys behind this landmark exhibition at cmog.org. Resist is a proud sponsor of Talking Out Your Glass podcast. Resist provides businesses and artists with advanced sand carving equipment and sand carving films. The company also offers guidance and support through video tutorials, hands-on workshops, and online help as you expand your business. With over 40 years of experience, Resist has been a direct manufacturer of laserable films, photoresist films, custom mask stencils, and equipment, serving the sand carving industry. For more information, visit resist.com. The American Glass Guild is a nonprofit organization whose core mission is to work toward building an environment within the craft that both cultivates novices and facilitates experienced craftspeople and artisans to attain a higher level of expertise. AGG is an inclusive organization that actively seeks the participation of all people with an interest in decorative glass, its creation, preservation, and restoration. Their annual conference is a great way to receive education, make connections, and see the latest in the art glass world. Visit AmericanGlassGuild.org for more information. And now, we return to Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend. So as you mentioned earlier, Paul Marioni invited you to be his TA at Pilchuck in 1980, and you were invited back to teach the next year. Talk about Pilchuck and the role it played in your life and evolution as an artist.
Well, it's really my alma mater. So much has happened at Pilchuck and through Pilchuck, and it's given me access to work with glass blowers. So I was able to do a whole different kind of work through that. Anyway, so I was his TA in 1980, and I had never seen anything like it. I didn't know anything like Pilchuck existed, and everybody there was glass, and everybody there was like amazing, like Bertil and Ulrika Velin and Chihuly, and I think Klaus Moyer was there. I'm not 100%. Italo Scanga, Walter Lieberman, Richard Royal, Bill Morris, Flora and Joey Kirkpatrick. I mean, I don't know that I can remember everybody, but it was like a star fest, and I had no idea. I didn't know. I knew about Chihuly, but I didn't really know anybody else. And Paul. And anyway, so I was his TA, and so I came armed with my X series, and they had never seen anything like that. So also, anyway, I built a piece while I was there called the Ex Madonna. At that time, Chihuly thought that the best way for people to learn was to watch artists work. And so it was almost expected that you would make something or some things while you were there. And so I was was staying with Paul before we went, and I was walking the neighborhood and bought a plastic Madonna at the dime store and a few other little trinkets. And I ended up making an X piece called the Ex Madonna. Pilchuck ended up acquiring that, and then also I was introduced to glass blowing. I'm not talking much about teaching, but honestly, it was such a flurry of I'm not sure what I taught other than just being there. I think it was Bill Morris said, "Why don't you design something for blown glass and we'll blow it for you?" And I was like, so I did, and I designed I drew a picture of the X vessel, and so there was sand blowing there because of Bertil, and so the piece I wanted it ripped and cracked, and I stuck metals in it so I could attach other things to it once it was annealed, and then I glued Kugler color bar on the bottom, and so that was the X Vessel 1. And so I was blown away, and Ben Moore I think was the art director, artistic director at that time, and he was so supportive. He always was, I have to say, and he's such a good artist too. Or he passed a few years ago, sadly, very sadly. And anyway, he invited me back. They invited me back to teach next year, and I had never taught before, but I did. I went back. So, and then most years of the 80s, I taught there every summer. Now, I was asked by, Haystack and other places, but I couldn't really travel that much because I had my business and my son, and I had responsibilities. And I want to say that anytime any work done by me or done the screens in the studio, anytime anything like that sold, which was kind of off the books, I split the profits with profits. Hardly ever a profit, but anyway, I split whatever we received for those works with my partner, Rodney Smith. Again, if I was going for 2 weeks, he was taking over everything. So he was really helping me, and that's the arrangement that we came to. And I don't, that's just what it was.
Talk a little bit more specifically about your leaded screens. Talk about the work and the successful exhibition of that work.
I was pretty keen on using rondelles, again, because of being influenced by the rondelles I saw blown at Pilchuck. And the Splash Dash Dots and Dells was the next screen that my studio made, I designed, and I think it went to a show in Chicago, that Habitat Gallery. I showed with them a bit, not that much. I wasn't really their type of work, but they liked the screens. And they showed them at a show in Chicago, and that one got purchased and is now in the Detroit Institute of the Arts. But, it was a big deal to ship them. I had 2 other screens there at that time, and they were shown, but they were in storage that night, and there was a fire, and so 2 of them got destroyed. So that's that story. The screens were, they were portable. They were a way to have leaded glass be seen outside of architecture, separate from it. And they were just beautiful. Honestly, they were probably the most beautiful things that I made, if we want to go straight for beauty and good design. So I could have done that. I mean, honestly, if I had just done screens or that type of work and just stuck with that, I'd probably be, I don't know what I'd be. Anyway, I'd be Susan with doing screens. Anyway, the other thing that I mentioned earlier about, it was really important to me that they didn't block the light, that they played with the light. So I would be very, very selective about the types of glasses I would use. I would use silly commercial beveled glass, that people were using for clusters and stuff, and I would break them up and turn them into these sort of playful design motifs but they added to the optics, the reflection and the refraction of light. I'd use really solid opalescent glass, mostly opalescent glass. This rolled sheet glass I don't like. So I would either use it to accentuate what I didn't like, mostly in the X works, but in the screens, I would use it so that the eye would stop right at the surface of the actual piece, so that the eye could go, it would reflect light, it would refract light, it would stop your eye at the surface of the glass, it would emit a little bit of light, it would be distortive glasses that were slightly distortive, that would, whatever was behind it was distorted in that way. And then the opals and opaque glasses, that shimmery kind of gauzy look. These were pieces that would take the light in many different ways, in many different environments, and I just love that.
So what or who were some of your early influences?
Oh, well, because my background was in art and I had a big, I'm always like contemporary art. I like what's going on, what artists are thinking about now. one of my biggest influences was my best friend, who is still my best friend, Rodine Landau, who was a fashion designer. And she moved from Austin up to New York City and actually never returned. But I would go up to New York and visit her like 3 times a year. And so I was able to see a lot of shows and galleries and connect with people. But I was looking at people like Judy Pfaff and Thomas Lanigan Schmidt, both of whom used any materials and all materials in their installations and their sculpture, tinsel and plastics and you name it, go to Canal Street and go in a plastic store, and all of that was treated the same as paint marks or any kind of other art making marks. Julian Schnabel, his paintings where he included a ceramic plates inside of paint on canvases. I was also influenced by postmodernism, anything that was breaking from the past. Like, we're not modernist, we were going to screw around and add decoration and pattern, and it was a big deal at that time. The movements were called pattern and decoration, and then there was Neo-Expressionist painting, which brought the figure back into the painting world. So that decoration and patterning was a big influence on me, and I loved it. I mean, somebody like Lucas Samaras, who was doing so-called paintings, and they were stretched basically like the same process that typically a woman would do making a quilt. So it was like permission to use those kind of women's crafts, women's in the home, anything goes, decoration, and all of that. That was absolution for me to use whatever I wanted to on glass. In terms of the glass world, Thurman Statham, he's one of the few others that was using mixed media with glass at that time. Narcissus, for a number of reasons, in terms of influences. Dick Weiss, because of his strict geometry, that is sort of minimalist approach, but just the idea that he was using this minimal geometry was appealing to me, as obviously I shifted to the X. Hank Adams, I loved his work. Paul Morioni, just bringing concepts and ideas into the work and then using all kinds of new processes in the making of his stained glass, and then all the other things he did with it. He didn't stick with one way of looking at it. So I guess early on it was more like that. I mean, Robert Kellman, I loved his work.
I did too. I haven't heard his name in so long. It's good to think of what he was doing again.
He just came out with a book, and I haven't bought it, but he's I think he's still in Oakland or that area. He's probably the mayor of Oakland. He's just so smart. But anyway, his pieces were all this sort of opaque glass, and he treated them off the wall with these metal stands that were beautiful. But his use of lead line as a way of drawing with the glass was remarkable to me, and sort of like Paul Klee, and I guess that would tie in with somebody like Johannes Schreiter, who was doing crazy cool things with his lead line in his work. So I was just collecting data that way. And then back to the clothes designer, she was using just wacky fabrics. And I would take scraps of her fabrics and laminate it between glass and use them in some of my wall pieces. So all of it was a confluence of it's okay to do whatever you want, Susan.
So eventually you began to fuse studies in painting, your new experience with glass, and your particular view of the world to create the dimensional collage pieces you called your X series. Describe and discuss that body of work. You touched on that a little bit during your Pilchuck answer, but tell us a little bit more about the X series.
I guess I started them in about probably 77, and I was getting tired by the restriction of doing commission work. Like, it just seemed like, Art Nouveau or Victorian or some other weird permutation of mediocrity in some ways. I mean, I did some good work, but that wasn't enough for me. And so, again, referring to these influences in my research about what was going on in the world, I don't, oh, I was also in my punk period where we had art destruction parties. We'd go out late at night and dance, after I'd gone to work and then worked in my studio on the X's. I'd go do crazy punk dancing. I mean, so fun. But anyway, so that was kind of an X
Would you like
period.
to give us a sample?
A sample of what?
Punk dancing. Your punk dancing.
Oh, then I'm going to be leaving the screen.
Well, you could back up so we can see you.
No, I don't have any video of that, but you could probably look it up pretty easy.
Okay.
Anyway, so that was a time of Xing out old ways of looking at things. And so I took on the X, and everything I did, whether it was on paper, drawing, collage. I did some really cool collage X pieces that various people have. I don't think I ever sold one, and then the first X I did was called the hexaplex X. And they were still rectangles, but again, I wanted them to be not in architecture. I picked a dimension that I thought would fit in most windows, however, to hang. And I was using cheap and expensive hand-blown glass. That seemed like a violation right there because, you had the quality of glass, the cost of glass. If you have a window with blown glass, it's going to be much higher. So there was this idea about the hierarchy of the quality of the material. And then this whole idea of the transparent and translucent juxtaposed in just the right way. And I've carefully selected glasses that fit in the X format. And I think you have a slide of a septiplex X. So hexaplex had 6 sections, septiplex had 7 sections. And then also to conform with the idea that the piece would be something at night different from the day was I put glitter and paint and all kinds of things on the metals and also on the zinc borders so that they enhance the whole concept of overdoing, actually. So once I got into doing the rectangular X's, and they started getting some traction in the glass world. I'd enter a competition in the Explosive X1. It was on the cover of another glass magazine. But then I just went, why am I doing rectangles? I don't need to, because I started getting closer and closer to the wall. I just went, I don't need the window anymore. I don't need architecture. I just need a white wall, like art needs a white wall. And so then I just went crazy. I will point out that I think the undecaplex X, which is 11 sections, is the piece that's going to be at the Corning show that's coming up in May. And it was called Undecaplex X, subtitled Ugly X. And it's, I really was trying to make the ugliest piece I could try to make. And that's what the curator picked, but I love it. Anyway, so then, like in '79, I started breaking out and doing irregular shaped patterns and having even more fun, laminating fabrics and plastics and in between glass and basically using stained glass technique to put them all together. It took some engineering, but you can, and there's one, I think you have a slide of me with fabricating a piece called Extinction. And, it was like 5 feet tall on the wall. I still have it. One thing that's interesting to me is that, as the ball got rolling and people mostly other artists, were like, we love this, we want more of it. Everybody was sending slides to everybody. We want slides of you so we can talk to. I was curious how much communication we had by letter to ask for, 35 millimeter slides to send to each other, and that did so much of that. But anyway, the ball kept rolling. Most of those pieces I have. It's so interesting to me that they brought me so much attention, and yet they were not purchased typically. Except the Neo Nouveau X, I will say, that was in a show at the Dallas Museum of Fine Art that was featuring crafts. People were breaking ideas with crafts at the Dallas Museum of Fine Art. And that piece sold out of that show and went to New York City and was in a collection. And the woman who owned it, her name is escaping me at this moment, left it to the Museum of Art and Design, and they have it in their collection now, and it's being lent to Corning. So that one's got good provenance for sure. But like exfoliation, which I did after I went to Pilchuck, I was just astounded by how much green. Everything is so green. It was like annoying. And so I did this piece called Exfoliation. It's sort of like nature dressed up for a cocktail party. I had vintage glass decals, and I searched out jewelry findings and metal findings, and I had just such a stash. I could have opened a store. And I would attach that to the glass and solder it to the metals, and I just, like a dab of paint, I would use a dab of plastic or a dab of shiny paper. It was so exciting for me at that time to work like that. And I also believe that every material that one works with or one handles has meaning. It has the way it was made, the intention for which it was made, the typical use of that material, or that button, or that so that to me brought more meaning to the stained glass work. I mean, it's so interesting that I was still using the stained glass technique and yet presenting it as painting with all of these cheap materials. My motto at the time was "too much is not enough," and I was good at it.
We'll return to Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Toyo Super Cutters, preferred by glass artists worldwide. Toyo is distributed by Glass Accessories International on the web at glassaccessories.com, where you can check out the entire line of professional quality Toyo glass cutters. Find your long-lasting cutter in a color and handle style that meets your needs at an authorized Toyo dealer. Now on Instagram at Toyo Super Cutters. This episode is sponsored by Yakagani Glass, manufacturer of the world's finest art glass, celebrating their 50th anniversary in 2026. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram to be the first to hear about their limited edition anniversary glass products and celebrations planned throughout the year, beginning with the formulation of their new gold pink replacement color. Tristan and Leanne would like to express their immense gratitude to the art glass community for their support and patronage throughout the year. Thank you from the crew at Yakagani Glass. Visit yakaganiglass.com for more information. The Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass is a leading resource for glass collectors, artists, gallerists, museum personnel, educators, and others on all things related to glass art. Its mission is to further the development and appreciation of art made from glass. It also provides a place for the glass community to have robust conversation around glass art through its weekly virtual programs and provides grants and scholarships. Membership gives glass lovers access to many members-only benefits. For more information and to become a member of AACG, visit aacgglass.org. In business since 1996, Wet Dog Glass delivers unsurpassed value to glass studios like the Corning Museum of Glass and others around the globe. Offerings include turnkey hot glass studio equipment, studio planning consultation, and technical support. Wet Dog Glass, your studio's best friend. For more information, visit wdg-us.com. Now back to Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend. Well, you pioneered many of the approaches to glass widely used today to include non-traditional unfired painting on glass, mixing glass with other media, and presenting painted, decorated, adorned glass on the wall in reflected light. Were those approaches met with excitement by the viewing public, or were they a hard sell in the beginning?
I think people were really intrigued by them and I got invited to a lot of shows. And but I think there was a certain constituency that probably thought it was crap, you know. A, it was flat glass, and B, it was messing around with the material in a way that didn't show the respect that it should have. Now, when you say hard sell, again, most of them didn't sell. I think that I wouldn't have been so. I don't feel like I was fighting. I was having so much fun and so much excitement that I think that was transmitted through the work, and that, you know, people didn't want them, but they loved them. You know, maybe. And I can, you know, and also it was a time of like fighting against, like rebelling. It was a time of rebelling. And so that rebellion was typical of that time, the early 80s and the late 70s. And I just felt like I was on a roll. But, you know, railing against and rebelling against only lasts so long, you know, on the front lines. Yeah, I would say yes, people liked them, and I was included.
Well, rather than settle into a style in the mid-1980s, you continued to experiment. Talk about works such as Bacante Texana or Chernobyl Cocktail. How were they representative of that period? And were you still referencing your X series in some ways at that point?
Yes, I was still using similar techniques. Maybe in the style I was working in, they could be considered more refined, less throwing everything at it, but still still working with the stained glass technique. It's sort of crazy. The works, like sort of after 1985, I sort of rolled into what happened in what's happening in the world, what happened in my personal life, what happened in things that I experienced, and those became more, you know, influenced by my unconscious or subconscious. Just what do I think about that? I mean, Chernobyl Cocktail, for instance, was influenced. There's a work that I did before it called The Burnt Bush, and it was inspired by these pilchucks on a tree farm, and they cut down all the trees, and then you're left with a field of, you know, maybe 36-inch high stumps. And then as I would go back years later, and then they burn all the slash so that they look like, how could they ever live again? And I would come back a couple years later, and that same field would have, and even a stump on Pilchuck's campus had a new tree growing out of what appeared to be a dead tree. And it just sort of symbolized like rebirth, and also it was like a flame, you know, having reference to the flame from the fire. I think it was also like the 200th anniversary of the country or something. They were redoing the flame of the torch on the Empire State, no, the, what's her name? Statue of Liberty. Anyway, there was a flame vibe going on. So the Burnt Bush was did not use stained glass techniques, but it had fused glass, cast glass, painted glass on a wood panel. More about that later. But the Chernobyl cocktail, I think I don't know why. I think there was nuclear stuff was, as a power source was going on at time. But I started making this one, and it was all orange, as if it was burned and there was a glow of heat or energy or something behind it. And then there was a dead bird flying away from the flame. The flame, again, it's the stump with the bush, but it's also now this structure that looks like a cone. Anyway, while I was making it, the Chernobyl tragedy happened. I mean, I couldn't believe it. It was like I was making it, and I started making it before it happened. It wasn't a thing. And so, anyway, that's what I'm trying to say, is that I just sort of went with this idea of flame and rebirth, and then it evolved into another version of the stump with the flame, and that turned out to be super potent at that time. Bacchante Texana, again, from this period, was a self-portrait. I will mention that I also have been influenced by early Cubist work, like Braque and Picasso, when they started using all of their mixed media in their collage paintings. Anyway, so I every now and then will refer to that kind of structural system. And Bacchante Texana is, Texas celebrant, who was me. It's sort of a self-portrait, but it's very cubistic, and it has laminated fabrics and bows, brass bows, and horseshoes that are breasts, and wild metal coming out of the head. Some things I can't really explain, but I think that after the X's, that period was a little more difficult, because I was untethered from my fervency of the X. So, but it's pretty much where I've been since then. So I can't. I'm not complaining, but some things are not as clear to me as others conceptually.
In the mid-1980s, you were the first female president of the Glass Art Society. Talk a little bit about the environment for women in glass during your career.
It wasn't great. All right.
So well, they're doing a show on the hidden gems of the glass, studio glass movement, right?
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah, yes. Essentially, yes. I'm sorry. I can. Anyway, in 1981, again, I'm getting more and more involved with the glass scene. In 1981, I was invited to speak at the Glass Art Society conference, and I guess I blew some minds with the X's there. But anyway, Bill Warmus, Robert Kellman, who were both on the board, and Dan Daly noticed me. I think so the next year, I went to the New York conference, New York City. I went to a little bit of it, and it was like they were courting me to be on the board. And I didn't even know that much about the Glass Art Society, but Dan Daly does blown glass. Bill Warmus, curator at Corning at the time, contemporary curator, and Robert Kellman of flat glass. That's what they were called at the time, but flat glass artists, kind of an aberration from what typically the Glass Art Society was, mostly male, and blown glass, hot glass, men mostly who came from the university situation, and they had a similarity. It was tight, they were really kind of establishing their position in this new studio glass movement as the innovators and perpetrators, and kind of self-anointed. I'm not. It's just what it was. But so I was asked to be on the board, and of course I said yes, because I'm like that. yeah, more, what's that about? Let me do that. And so it was not it was not great all the time. I will say that, Joel Myers was on the board and Fritz Dreisbach. They were always very kind, more glass blowers. And then again, Bill and Robert kept pushing me to go further. So after 2 years, I then became. They were schooling me in the ways of how you do it. We didn't have any staff, so we had to do everything ourselves, which was really hard. Running a business, being a mother, doing this X world that was separate from the business world, and joining the Glass Art Society thing was nuts. But I made it through. But anyway, yeah, I mean, there were some times where I was criticized for my choices. I loved it. I mean, the first conference I was part of organizing was the 1983 Tucson conference, and I got to invite James Turrell to be the keynote speaker. Like, what did he have to do with hot glass? Not anything. And I was just so excited to meet him, and that was, so what I think I represented was a shift from the norm, and that was not always met well, and but it was exciting. And the next year it was Corning, and Bill Warmus and I worked on that conference, and then I was chosen or asked to be the president of GAS, and I said yes. And the next conference was in New Orleans, and I asked Ettore Sotsas from the Memphis group to be the keynote speaker. And I remember, and he went overtime. I mean, he was amazing. He came with his, entourage, all Italians with their white suits on, and they were so nice, so cool, and so, I mean, they covered all of the design world with what they were up to. And I remember Marvin Lepofsky outside the conference where he was speaking saying, "This is the worst conference ever." And I was just like, I mean, I didn't, it was fine. I mean, it was really great that we could have those kind of speakers at that time. And so I gained a lot from the joy of that kind of learning. And then we got Kate Elliott joined, and then Sylvia Vigiletti had been on the board, I don't know, maybe since the beginning, and she was the treasurer, and she did that with seeming, without complaint, which on my knees, so that she was amazing. And then Audrey Handler was on, but wasn't on when she was on. So you got to know people pretty well, and I'm sure that's the case today. Right. Suzanne France became came on the board. I think she became the next president, or maybe she was on the board for 2 years and then became president. But so then there was another woman, and then the late 80s, Ginny Ruffner came on, and I think she served 1 year as president. But there's a picture here of the three of us in 1990 at the Seattle Gas Conference. We just captured it, us together. It's kind of like soldiers,
Yeah, yes.
It's good.
So you moved to LA in 1988. How did that change your life, and how did your work evolve in that new environment?
Well, it was all right. So, I talk gloriously about my time in Austin and my business and my partner and all, and how much work we were able to make. And it was, but honestly, at that time, I was getting bored with being in Austin. I wanted to experience a big city. I had a gallery, the Curlin Summers Gallery, from 1981, I think, to 91, and they were like, Ruth Summers was the true supporter of me and my work, and she was in LA, so I was shipping work back and forth and stuff like that. But so anyway, my now husband, Richard Amend, came to the studio, and they were filming a movie. He was a production designer in the film business, and they wanted to shoot a murder scene through a contemporary glass door panel, the door on this home where they were filming. And so they rented, I had a perfect thing, for the job. And so they rented it. And but he came, and then they decided they wanted to commission more glass for this particular set. And so typically the guy that worked for him, the set designer or something, would make the decisions, but he came back to make the final decision. And anyway, he was so interesting, and he knew so much about art, and I don't know, so I asked him out. And then within short time, that was 87, we were flying back and forth from LA. Anyway, so we ended up getting married, and almost immediately was pregnant, arrived in LA pregnant, and we were living in this kind of funky loft space above a car repair shop. It was raw LA. It was, but I had a studio, but I didn't have any glass equipment except for a glass cutter and pliers and stuff. But I wanted to make work that was more like paintings, more literally like thinking of them as paintings. So I wasn't doing I dropped the lead line, and also Richard worked with all these industries that can make anything for film. I worked with this maker, what was it? And I could draw a picture of a shape, and then I could have it be dimensional, and with hard foam and wood they could build up the surface so that these pieces actually got to be almost 12 inches off the wall at times. But a piece like Pelagic Variations, which I was kind of looking at microscopic underwater life, like who hasn't done that in their career? But it was called Pelagic Variations, and it was a rounded sort of feminine female form with a big cutout diamond. I mean, it's very female shape and reference, and the dark blue interior went down deep, and that was all covered with resins. But on the outside, the skin was all paint and chunks of glass. So it was kind of like it was some kind of erosion process that was going on with these chunks of cullet sticking out of it. I love that piece, actually. And then, so I was basically working with what I had and mounting it on wood, and these pieces got to be pretty heavy. The cinque petal, Cinque, 5 means 5 in French, the 5-petaled flower, thinking a little about Andy Warhol, pop flower kind of, who doesn't love that? But on each of the petals is one form of the 5 craft delineations that at that time the museums would use to say. One time I had a curator say, no, we're not interested in your work because craft, goes on pedestals or somewhere else. It doesn't, art goes on the wall. So there's always been that thing about whether I'm an artist or I'm a craft artist, or I honestly believe I've always been a hybrid, and that's the way it's been. But anyway, there's the 5, there's metals, glass, a basket, wood, ball, glass. So I was, a lot of sort of hyper mosaic, application of glass to the backing. So I made do with what I had. I was, and I was, like I said, I was also pregnant making this work, and had a solo show, and it was a lot going on.
We'll return to Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend in just a moment. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Milestone Decal Art, providing glass artists and suppliers with superior quality water slide decals, ranging from high temperature fusing to low temperature glassware applications. Their curated decal selection includes hundreds of high quality water slide decals, from solid color silkscreen prints to detailed photographic digital prints. printed in the USA using conflict-free mineral ink, Milestone can print your artist's custom decals too. Visit their website at milestoneDecalArt.com or find them on social media and YouTube to learn more about using decals on glass. The Association of Clay and Glass Artists of California is a community of creators, collectors, galleries, and supporters dedicated to celebrating and elevating awareness of clay and glass arts. ACGA hosts the largest clay and glass-centered art festival on the West Coast in Palo Alto each July. If you are a glass artist working in California, please join them at acga.net. This episode of Talking Out Your Glass is sponsored by Ed Hoy's International, the single source for all your art glass needs, serving all levels of customers from retail to wholesale. The company offers an expansive selection of sheet glass, tools, classes, and supplies from all major suppliers, including Bullseye, Wismont, Kokomo, Yakagani, and Oceanside Glass. For more information, visit edhoy.com. Since 1903, the Stained Glass Association of America has cultivated a growing community of members across the U.S. who share a passion for art glass. Whether you've recently discovered the beauty of leaded, stained, or ornamental glass, or you've been practicing the craft for a lifetime, SGAA welcomes you to join the oldest and most vibrant membership organization dedicated to the illumination of stained glass. Learn more and become a member or subscribe at stainedglass.org. Now back to Susan Stinsmuehlen-Amend. Well, works such as String of Boobs, 1991, Wait, 1993, and Boy, 1993, were inspired by the female body. What was your approach to making those works, and were you trying to create a counterpoint to centuries of images of women in art created by men?
Well, I mean, that's unconscious. I wouldn't say that, but probably yes. It's fine for you to say it. But honestly, I actually had a scare with breast cancer, and I had to do a biopsy, and I went to this surgeon, and he was like, "That you don't have to worry. That's all I do are breasts." And I just went, I bet you make all kinds of breasts look all kinds of ways. And so I started thinking about that. And I also had time at Pilchuck. When I taught at Pilchuck in the earlier days, I always got at least two sessions, sometimes three, in the hot shop to work with the glass blowers to make works, which was such a plus, such a gift. But anyway, so this reflects 2 different years working with glass blowers at Pilchuck. I never, most of the blown glass I've done has been in conjunction with Pilchuck or other teaching situations where, you don't get paid much, but they would give you the option of working with the glass blowers like at RISD or San Francisco State or San Bernardino, anyway. So at this, the String of Boobs and the Face were, I was thinking, surrealism has been a lot of an influence and a background kind of always on the table underneath anything that is put on the table. And Magritte in particular, and, the whole thing with the unconscious and the subconscious and the odd, twisted ways of looking at normal things, Anyway, one of his works had, on Face, he had a painting that was of a female torso, and the breasts and the navel and the crotch were depicted on it, but he called that, it was called The Rape. And anyway, just the way, I've always thought that vessels reflected the female body. I mean, we are the vessels. Obviously, I was pregnant not long before this, but, and so I took the vessel. In this case, the vessel is shaped more like a chemical vessel, a Chemex or some kind of beaker. So it had that science kind of orientation. And then I put the breasts on, and then the navel, and they incised a small kind of crotch line. And the thing that was ironic about this is that I was working with some of the best glass blower sculptors on the planet from Italy, Loredano Rosine and Pino Cineretto. And they were like fighting, and they spoke Italian, I didn't, but they were like fighting over what the breasts were supposed to look like. And so it was a real ridiculous challenge to be in the hot shop with them and trying to. So there's some of that cartoony breast look is a result of that, but the string of boobs was kind of like thinking about a string of pearls that are gradated pearls from larger to smaller, and thinking about that in terms of, what size breasts do you have? What size breasts do you want? Continue with weight and buoy. They were done 2 years later, and weight is I decided on a peanut shape to be like the fetus, and so I had somebody blow the white on buoy. Obviously, it's a play on boy and buoy, like a float in the ocean holding up a net and it's blown glass, and then I wove white cord over it in the same manner that a net is made for fishing, and then I attached a brass, what do you call those things, latch. So, and then laid the piece on a red pillow. Brancusi used to lay his very streamlined heads on pillows. He experimented many ways with how to present sculpture. But anyway, that caught in my ear, my head also. So it was kind of like this peanut shape that was blown breath into it. It's white like a soul captured, and it's also maybe the fetus, and then it's the net is the placenta, and the pillow is the womb. I don't know. Yeah, I was thinking probably more literally than any other period in my career. I was really thinking about really going personal and feminist.
In 2001, 6 of your favorite artists and you received an invitation to participate in the first Hauberg Fellowship at the Pilchuck Glass School. Tell us about that.
Well, they decided to start a program called the Hauberg Fellowship, and Ben Moore was involved with that, and he thought it was an opportunity for artists to come and work as a team, as a group, on a that have a commonality to work on campus for 2 weeks on their own work. You couldn't have glass blown for you or work in other studios so much, except if you wanted to do printing. But it was these. Anyway, Ben Moore picked this group, and we had all been longtime friends, and it was amazing. It was Walter Lieberman, Dick Weiss, Cappy Thompson, Bob Carlson, who am I forgetting? Paul Morioni. And so in 2001, there were like 7 or 8 of us, and we went and we worked in the studio building, and we just did whatever we wanted. And the focus was on painting on glass, which I had always avoided because it was too traditional. But I was around all of these painters that, had used vitreous enamels fired in a kiln on glass, and they were very experienced and inspirational. And we just had a great time together, and we didn't work on one project together, but because we were side by side and because we loved each other so much, it was very inspiring. So that was great. And it also took me to doing more work with painting on glass. And not long after that, I did actually buy a real kiln, not just some, and I've had it ever since. And I paint on glass when the ideas warrant that, but I definitely, since that time, I have done a lot more traditional technique of painting on glass in typically untraditional ways. Again, I gotta rebel.
Well, in 2004, you and your husband, Richard Amend, were invited to exhibit at the Carnegie Art Museum in California. The show and the catalog were titled Between Abstraction and Revelation. This opportunity prompted a new series for you called Calendar Notations. Tell us about that series.
That was amazing. I want to just say that Richard and I are part of the Ojai Studio Artists. That is a group here in Ojai, and we've been members for 23 years or something. I don't know. It's something to, to be in a community and to participate in it. And anyway, we have tours twice a year, and the curator from the director from the Carnegie Art Museum in Oxnard, there's more than one Carnegie, came through the studio, and she liked both of our works. It was a cold visit, and asked us to be in a show together, and we were thrilled. And so we did that, and we felt like it was so momentous. We decided to try to raise money and do. The museum didn't have the funds. Raise money and do a catalog, and that catalog is really a fine, one of the finest catalogs I've ever seen. And I'm proud to have it, and I'm proud. Richard Late did the original layout for it, and then an amazing designer who works for Disney and all kinds of stuff, graphic art. Anyway, so I had a whole kind of variety of work. Two things that were a lot of mixed media I just want to mention are the remnants, and that is typical. That was from '97, but that is typical of me being more autobiographical, and each panel I thought were separate pieces, and then it turned out they were one piece that I called remnants. So they're bits and pieces of ideas in many different, religion, politics, personal, all of that. And then, so there's one slide that shows that on the wall, but next to it is a thing that I also did, again, when I didn't have equipment in Ojai. I did, at Pilchuck, I was introduced to this technique where different blown forms were attached to each other, in Calmo. And so I started making in Calmo pieces by gluing together glass and plastic and all different things. So that was called the stacks, and they were displayed in this beautiful vitrine. Anyway, so I didn't feel like I was working on, I started looking at desk calendars, and I had like a stack of them on my desk, and they're all paper, and they have everything about my personal life and business life is on paper. And while I was talking on the phone, which that's how we did it, I would do unconscious drawings, doodles. I mean, everybody does them. But anyway, so I started looking at the doodles, and then I don't think you have any slides of these, but I started blowing them up, and they became something, this big became something this big, which isn't huge. So they became, I thought, icons of my unconscious. And so then I was thinking about things that I do unconsciously, and then so I did a series with the doodles, and then I started thinking, well, what's wrong with the rest of the information on that calendar? And so I started going through the calendars and choosing sections, and decided to paint them on glass. And they're pretty much taken as is from the calendar, blew it up, and then used that as a painting pattern. And I took a section from each month of the year and painted it on clear glass on both sides, and then on the back side, I would include some form of nature that I noticed at that time of year, like, crows in October or rats, and they're always around. I don't know what month I pick for those, but anyway, so they became this sort of personal diary that was painted on glass, a fragile material. I also slumped the glass, so it was wavy. So the way the light hit it, it was almost like you couldn't read what your diary, what your calendar was through the distortions of the glass. And then all of this calendar information was floating on clear glass. So I felt like it was invisible support for, aspects of my life. And then I displayed it, the 12 panels on 2 shelves, and that became part of the beginning of the calendar series. And I continued to do more. I just want to say that at this time, and the time when I had the vessels that we were just talking about, the weight and face phase and string of boobs, there was a woman, she still exists, but her name is Ann Cohen, and she has a glass group called Glass Alliance of Los Angeles, and she saw those blown glass pieces at a show I was in at LA Municipal Art Gallery, and her people, she takes her group around, they bought almost everything, and I just was like, what? And it was all this really personal stuff. And anyway, she then opened a gallery called DNA Fine Art, and started showing my work. So once again, I had a gallery, and that was amazing. So she ended up purchasing this, and then she had other ones of the collectors that she kind of led, purchased some other calendars that I did, and then some people, a couple of clients, one through Traver Gallery, wanted me to do their calendar on glass. So I had to poke around in their lives to come up with the information that was going to be on them. And then as time passed, it was like digital calendars, so the calendars looked different. It's funny. Anyway, but it did lead me to doing this, displaying glass on shelves, leaning up against the wall in a very sort of tentative way. I've never had one break, but and then went on to do multiple layers of that as well. And that was inspired by the thing. And I did I think include one slide that shows some of Richard's paintings in the Carnegie Art Museum as well. We've shown together quite a few times. People have thought it was their idea. They thought it was a good idea for that to happen, and we've been thrilled and honored to do that.
You worked with glass blowers again on the creation of your Common Vessel series. Talk a little bit about that work.
The Common Vessels, again, came from this idea of the unconscious, like handling all the things that we handle in a day, especially as a woman, cleaning supplies, bathroom lotions and eye wash, just all kinds of things. And again, unconscious. And so once in 2006, I was asked to be an artist in residence at the Pilchuck Glass School and the Tacoma Museum of Glass. And so those were big opportunities for working with hot glass. So I started setting up still lives of just the common things in my life, and then did line drawings from those, and then brought those to the hot shop. And turns out that industrial made items are very difficult to hand make in the studio. Initially, I would engrave. Once I had the glass back in my studio, I would engrave on it, and at first I was engraving some of the information that was on the actual product, but then I started adding doodles and other kinds of texts and drawings, so that it kind of was trying to talk about all of those things. Nobody wants, you don't think about it when you're putting on deodorant or splashing your body with some kind of toilet, spray. I don't know. You're just doing things. But then, in fact, there's all of this other stuff that's going on in the head, in my head. And so I started trying to think about the subconscious mind while actually doing something that's very functional and normal and everyday. So it ties in, I think, with the calendar series in that way. I will say that I would engrave on these pieces with a diamond Dremel, and draw on them and make them deep, and then have rub them with oil paint, basically, so it's a little bit tentative. Eventually, I started the common vessel solid spray bottle and the baby bottles. I started using hot glass techniques, one of which was sandblasting little bits of glass and then filling them with a hot glass paint. And then in the hot shop, they would roll the clear glass over it, and it would capture those little bits of glass, and then they would distort or blow up. So it evolved, and it was nice. It was good.
Tell us about luxury glass and how you incorporated that into a 2012 commission.
All through my career, I'm influenced by experiences and by commissions and things that happen in the world. In this case, it was, again, Ann Cohen got me a commission for a couple in LA who were, he was, had this incredible collection of, they did call it luxury glass. It was basically cut and polished glass from like 1880 to 1910, it was sort of the heyday of the cut glass world. And I, honestly, up until recently, it was very unpopular. It went out of style, and it used to be the gift you would give to visiting dignitaries you'd give to a president of a country or something. It was so special, and there were a number of studios in the Northeast that were very good at this work, Libby Glass for one. And so he had this collection. I took a bunch of photographs. They wanted it to be about them. And she is a flower fanatic. I mean, they have this giant, like, 2-story structure that they put flowers that grow and flowers that are placed, that is an ongoing sort of sculpture of flowers, and then flowers everywhere. And who doesn't love flowers? I love flowers. And anyway, so what I did is use those two as prompts for doing this commission. And I took photographs. Even I have a few pieces. Who doesn't have a few pieces of the cut glass from their ancestors? My great-grandmother, and a candy dish or a pitcher. And they're actually beautiful. And so I started taking select pictures of some of these, and then blew those motifs up to like 2 feet by 2 feet. They're this big, and they became the sort of background or part of the structure of these depth paintings. These were, I proposed 3 panels, and they go in the entryway, and they are something I hadn't done before, again, inspired by my own self doing a commission. But they had a background layer of mirror, and we evolved to plexiglass mirror, and then a layer of 2 layers of 1/4-inch plate glass that I painted on both sides of both of those. And the mirror, so the idea was that there was this depth that you look through of the flowers and the mirror and the cut glass patterns, and then the mirror, you couldn't see yourself in the mirror. I make sure you can't do that. But the light goes in and bounces back out, and it was just beautiful. And these were large painting, like the flowers were like, 2.5 feet or something. And when you look at the slides, anyway, it took me about a year to do this, and then I continued. Luxury glass then became sort of symbolic of something something that is collected, that has great value, and then it goes out of style and doesn't have much value, and then what is it? And I'm just sort of thinking about artists, the art that we make. When does it go out of style? When is it worth $1,000? When is it worth $100? So it sort of came to represent that kind of thinking for me. But the clincher is I live in Ojai, California. The city was founded by Edward Drummond Libby in 1917, whose money was glass money, obviously. And he would come here for health reasons, but he ended up throwing a lot of money to redo the whole downtown. And the downtown is just, hired really well architects at the time, and it's beautiful. It's photo worthy. And there still is not, I think there should be some kind of public art or something that acknowledges that the money of Ojai or the city of Ojai was funded by glass. But anyway, that hasn't happened. So that, that gave more meaning to the continued use of these patterns. And it goes back into the pattern and decoration that I've always been interested in. And definitely the patterns on the cut glass are decorative and patterned. And so then that also represented to me culture. It became, when I continued to use it in other ways, like in man view pieces. Is that what were we going to talk about that next? Or?
Well, I was wondering about vignettes too.
Oh.
That's one of your series that incorporated luxury glass, correct?
Yes. And a good example of that is Man View, which has me looking at the men's body. Usually if I use women, I usually use women, but in this case I was thinking about men, how irritating they can be. But so I use like photo decals a lot. I like the idea of combining photography with the hand painted, and different kinds of approaches to the making also, I think, lend more meaning to works for me. Anyway, there was these diagrams of the male figure, and it had all the acupuncture points on the body, and I found that in Chinatown in LA, and so I scanned it, and I just thought about this man looking very vulnerable, and all the points of pressure that might heal him, or he was offering himself in the kindest way. So that man is in each of them. And then there's some sort of man from nature that is, from culture, that's dressed to impress. And one of them, it's, like the 18th century gentleman, and one it's like a 90s fashion shot, and the other one is a man in military outfit with a gun. And then there's the culture. It's like man in culture. The culture is the cut glass, the handmade, the representative of being in a culture, and then some form of nature, obviously representing nature. In this case, it was these night blooming cacti. They're called epiphyllum, and in various states of blooming and dying. And then there's a cartoon figure of each of the men being like the bad boy with the dick hanging out. So this is like, but the vignettes would again be sort of like this combining of elements. And I think Grocery Nude and Looking Back at Modern, where there are layers of glass, following the calendar series, that has the same thing, where there's a human form, there's some form of architecture or building, and um, nature, and to me those, combining those elements. The grocery nude is I use her a lot, and I took a Magritte torso and stuck her in a grocery cart forever to be shopping, and it's kind of funny and it's kind of sad, but it is about being stuck in that syndrome of buying and shopping and and the like.
Yeah. Well, you've said that you don't like competing for public art projects, but you have created a few, such as Coastal Conversion. Tell us a little bit about your public work.
I have done public works throughout my career. There was one I did in '84 for the Veterans Administration. It was a competition, an art and architecture program in Dallas, and I think that was like '84 or '5. That was a surprise that I won that one, but I don't have any. I haven't given you any pictures. But that was like my first real. I mean, doing commissions is kind of like doing public art. I mean, you have to figure out what they want, where it's going, what the relationship is. When I think the first major public art that I did was, again, not something I sought, but my involvement with the Hollywood Redevelopment Agency, Community Redevelopment Agency, and I was asked to serve on a panel to advise on this demonstration project where a number of public art projects were going to be placed to show, kind of reinvigorate Hollywood from its sort of staled environment. And so it was all very exciting working with people at that level. And it turned out that I also did several projects on that Hollywood effort. One was a crosswalk on Ivar Street, which is adjacent to Hollywood Boulevard, just a half a block off of it. And it was a crosswalk that led to the local library, and then trying to create on the other side of the crosswalk a small public space. It's also the street that had the farmers market, which is huge there. And so through time, I came up with this idea of paying homage to the theater and film, and thinking about encore, intermission, and applause. And so the street itself was, I worked with a fabrication company, Peter Carlson, and we came up with this sort of emblematic, like sort of historic theater motif in the center of the sidewalk, or the crosswalk. And I believe I included a picture to show you the scale with a car driving over that crosswalk. On the east side of the street, I also designed a backdrop fence that had a neon sign that said applause. And then the entryway to the library, which was a Frank Gehry designed library, it said encore. And it was precast colored concrete. We made the tiles offsite that were inlaid with glass plugs and cast bronze. And so it was really beautiful, especially when it first went up. And the metal was amazing. I don't have the best shot of that because it has a parking lot behind it. It's totally changed now. But that was all beyond my imagining of something I could do, and it worked out really well. That year, I worked on that project from '92 to '94, I think, but '93 to '94 were like probably the busiest years of my life. I also was doing windows. They weren't windows, they were actually light boxes for the cafe at the Jewish Museum in New York City at 92nd and 5th, I think. And so working, I'm not Jewish, but I was recommended by Janet Carden, who was the director of the American Craft Museum, called that at the time. And so again, I mean, it was like recommended, and then the other was like I was in the neighborhood and asked, and then at the same time I was working with a public art advisor who asked me to do these glass panels for the entrance to the AT&T Foundation headquarters in New York City. So there was 2 New York City jobs and this LA job, and I was juggling all of those at once. And 2 of them were stained glass. Again, these were made by, still even in 93, 94, were being made by my studio in Texas because they were the best craftsmanship, the best price, and I knew the people. So I was flying around, picking out glass, and etc. So those 3 things came to me without applying, and they meant a lot. And one note on the Jewish Museum, in 2014 they were remodeling the cafe, and they wanted to place these 6 windows based on blessings somewhere else in the world, and it was kind of artist gets the first right of refusal. It turns out that the temple in Ojai, I asked if they'd be interested, and they had windows that were actual windows that were almost the same size. And so the museum shipped the windows to Ojai. They raised money to alter the openings, and they installed them, and they look amazing. And they're in my hometown, and people love them. And then during COVID, I personally built 2 more windows, which so that they have 8 that fill the space. And that's a great story for me that they ended up here, and they're so beloved.
Yeah.
So that's private public art. 2009, the collection at River Park, a public art consultant put my name in the mix, and I got that job. It's a development that's like lifestyle development. It has a lot of public art in it, but it's basically an outside mall. And so I did my first sculpture. And again, I worked with fabricators, and it's a sculpture fountain, and it's kind of based again on the net and buoys that hold up the net, but the net's inverted, and these balls inside of it's these spheres that are transparent blue, about the color of the glass that was used in Japanese glass that were floats for fishing nets. I wanted them originally to be out of glass, and Ben Moore in Seattle blew a sample for me, but they were all too afraid. I don't know how Chihuly gets away with it, but they were too afraid to put glass in an outside space like that. So it's in a park in this development, and then the water comes through the pipes of the net and comes out of the mouths of bronze fish. And then also I did a mural on the side of a Whole Foods at the same development that was about, Central Coast California motifs, and it was a watercolor that I did that was blown up. I found a company that could print on porcelain tiles this imagery, and so that's the other imagery from that. And that led to, anyway, that was difficult because it was all during the financial 2007, 2008, and they closed down the project for almost a year, and then called me and said, okay, time to start back up. And that was at the same time that I was working on that commission with the luxury glass in Beverly Hills, the layered glass panels. It's never convenient, and you sort of never know what's going to happen next. Another public art project that I want to mention that was more recent was for a chapel at a hospital in Ventura, and my husband and I worked on that. It's also a freestanding glass screen. It's not a big space, but and all the glass is a juxtaposition of different types of glasses. The things I've been talking about being totally transparent and invisible, and then photographic decal images that reference the area, the ocean, the life, undersea life, and just the nature of the culture in Central Coast California, they call it. and then beautiful blown glass, sandblasted glass, just all kinds. So what happens is that there's variances. I think of it as, kind of the impressions when you come in here. It's not religious, although they have some crosses up in the wall or something, but they it's about variations in impressions from, you can see clearly, but people who come in here are usually upset about what's going on in their lives. So there's sort of a joy and a, how do you want to look far? Do you want to look near? Do you want to have that reflected back at you from the space of the glass? It's a carry on through my whole career, really, is thinking about levels of perception is what I call it. But what came from this, also, if you note on the freestanding screen, that is called Gold Trees. And it's a motif that Richard uses in his painting, Richard Amend, my husband. And we translated it with gold luster onto a distorted glass and fabricated it with brass. And it's a way for people to have some privacy when they first enter the space. But I really love that piece, and it's super hard to photograph. But what came from this particular commission was I started doing these pieces that I called grid poems, and it's just a continuation of the juxtaposition of different kinds of glass and motifs and images that sort of develop their own story about their being together, like, forcing things that draw my attention together and arranging them and kind of hoping and expecting that a narrative is going to come from it, and I believe it does. But that narrative is also ties back to the whole idea of stained glass, that stained glass originally was a depiction of stories that were told, in the 12th century, 13th century, stories about religion or community vis-a-vis the stained glass windows. And so I always think about stained glass having that narrative as part of its history and tradition.
So what's coming up for you, Susan, and your artistic family in 2026?
Well, our son is a ceramic artist, and he's super good. He's up in Petaluma, but he has become a member of the Ojai Studio Artists. I mentioned that before, and he started off when he was just in high school at getting scholarships from our organization, and then he went on to become a member, so he's one of the younger members of the organization. But the studio tours happen twice a year, actually, and so the three of us set up our locations on our property and show the work to all the people that come by, and so we really enjoy doing that together. We have had at least 2 museum shows, the three of us, and one was in Fresno at the Fresno Art Museum, and that was a really great show of all of our works together. They work well together, especially if we're involved in curating and placing. But that, unfortunately, that was during COVID, so I don't even know how many people saw it. And then we had a show at the Studio Channel Islands Art Center, and that we did everything on that show, and I don't think I've included any photos, but it was probably my favorite show I've ever been in. Just how great all our work, and we brought furniture and things, vignettes from our house into the thing. It was unique and great. I will mention that my first son, Jason Stinsmuehlen, is also a creative. He's a creative director of a advertising agency in charge of the Lexus campaign. So he's a creative who also has a decent income.
Yeah, that's always fun.
I'm really proud
combo.
I'm really proud of both my boys, who are 20 years apart. So,
and you've got your show coming up at Corning.
I do. I'm really happy about that. It opens May 16th, I think, or 15th. And there's a couple of pre-day events, and been asked to speak on a panel, and I'm really happy about that. I can't wait to see the response to all the work. And I continue to do, all through my career, I've also done a lot of volunteer work. And I don't know why that happened. It wasn't like my parents were volunteers in the community, but in Austin, I was on the first public places panel, and then I was on the ACC board, the American Craft Council, for 4 years. Um, the Hollywood redevelopment committee was on that. The Ojai Arts Commission, once I moved to Ojai, I served on that for 14 years and wrote the first public art ordinance for the city. And the Ojai Studio Artists, I'm served on various committees, but I'm the chair of the scholarship committee right now for the last 6 years. And then of course Pilchuck, I served on their board for 14 years, and that was great. And I love still being a part of Pilchuck. I don't know if I'll teach there again, but it's, like I said, it's been a big deal.
And you've been nominated for an ACC award.
That just happened last week, the American Craft Council College of Fellows Award, which came out of the blue.
Congratulations.
Another reason to look back, and maybe nostalgia is a form of is a strategy. Yeah, it's really great. And I guess they have their award thing in September in Minneapolis. Hopefully things will be settled down there. I'm basically now working in the studio on small things, and I almost feel like I've gone back to my beginnings. I just have so much beautiful glass, and I'm working from doodles, and I'm not trying to say it's important. I'm just working and find I'm interested in what I'm doing. So who knows? They could get bigger. They could turn back into some version of the X's, while I still have time on the planet.
Well, in your artist statement from 1979, you described your artistic intentions by saying, "These pieces, the X series, are disparate details combined to form a new compounded reality, a sort of abstracted microscopic surrealism. These are restless parts that are merged to form an image that is never definable. There is overlap, contradiction, and ultimate entropy." Is this true of your work overall?
I think it is. I didn't study glass at a university. I've been figuring it out on my own, in my way, all along, latching on to aspects of art history, and then just life and emotions. And it's I think that for me, curiosity, I'm just endlessly curious, and then I have to make something about that curiosity, or that captures that thought. And believe me, there's a lot I've thought about that I haven't made. But yeah, the restless and contradictory, and I just can never settle on something that's just beautiful or just pretty. It has to mean something to me, or it has to contradict tradition in some way. That makes me happy.
You also said, "No matter how many permutation my work has taken, it has always been about painting in the particular and ambiguous space of glass." Is this the best way to sum up your artistic goals?
Glass is just undefinable in some ways, and kinetic and active, and it just always behaves in unexpected ways, unlike any other material. And so I call it the space of glass.
You sent me a few quotes that you must like or that are meaningful to you. Do you want to read those and talk about those a little bit?
Well, the Rilke, in his writings, Letters to a Young Poet, um, I've it's like try to love the questions themselves as if they were locked rooms or books written in a very foreign language. And I think that harks back to not really, to wonder, to be curious again. It's just don't be afraid of the locked room. Just sort of venture in, and then the other from Jerzy Grotowski, a Polish drama theorist, said, "We cannot hide our personal essential things. We must open the door to the cycle of associations." I believe that heavily, use that as a method. The creative process consists, however, in not only revealing ourselves, but in structuring what is revealed. So that's part of my role as an artist as well.
Thanks for tuning in to Talking Out Your Glass. Many thanks to our sponsors: the Stained Glass Association of America, Ed Hoy's International, the Association of Clay and Glass Artists, Milestone Decal Art, Wet Dog Glass, the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass, Yakagani Glass, Toyo Supercutters, the American Glass Guild, Resist, the Corning Museum of Glass, and Monarch Glass Studio. I'll be back in 2 weeks with more great episodes featuring Ariana Macau of Zilani Conservation, Jen Ellick, and Jesse Owen. To find out more about this podcast, visit talkingoutyourglass.com, where you'll find all 10 seasons of the show, artist images, and more. Until next time, stay glassy.